Greetings! This video is about making spheres on a lathe. For those of you familiar with sphere making, the techniques I use are different from others you may have seen. I think this method is very straightforward and is an easy way to make spheres. There are no fancy jigs and a minimum number of tools are used. I've used this method to make spheres from 1 to 8 inches in diameter. This video covers the basic steps I use to create a solid sphere just like this one. Let's get started. For this project, you will need 2 blanks. The first one on the right is the sphere blank. I suggest using a 3x3 blank, roughly 3 3/4 inches long. The blank on the left is used as a jam chuck and needs to be a little bit bigger in diameter than the sphere piece, but it can be shorter, roughly 3/4 the length of the sphere blank. Mark centers on both ends of each blank. Mount the sphere blank between centers and turn to a cylinder using a spindle roughing gouge. I like to use a stub drive center for small projects like these, as it leaves a smaller center point hole. Turn a tenon on the end to fit your chuck. I like to use a 3/8 inch beading and parting tool for this. Slightly angling the tool on the final cut creates the dovetail I need to fit my chuck. Mount the blank in the 4-jaw chuck. Turn away the center hole and any other marks left by your drive center. Measure the diameter of the cylinder. Mark this distance along the length of the cylinder. Then mark half of that distance along the length. This halfway mark is very important to the process and must remain visible until the very end. Also mark the center of the cylinder at its end. Turn half the sphere as best you can by eye. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer it is to being a true half of a sphere, the better. I like using a bowl gouge here, but a spindle gouge would also work. Part the sphere off at the length line you marked along the cylinder. Prior to the next step on the sphere, you will need to make the jam chuck. Mount the jam chuck blank between centers, turn it to a cylinder, and add a tenon to fit your chuck. Making the jam chuck can sometimes take longer than making the sphere itself. Never fear, the jam chuck can be reused multiple times. You just need to true it back up and possibly do some minor resizing the next time you use it. Using your bowl gouge, hollow out the jam chuck to create an area to hold the sphere. This is like making a small end grain bowl. Since this is end grain, the cuts can be more difficult than on a standard side grain bowl. Take your time and take smaller cuts. The rim of the jam chuck does all of the holding, so the rest of the curve isn't as important. A round nose scraper or round carbide cutter can be used to refine the hollowed out area. It is possible to get a sphere stuck in the jam chuck. So you can drill a hole through the jam chuck so you can use your knockout bar with the lathe turned off to knock the sphere out of the jam chuck. At this point, test fit the sphere fit in the chuck. Aim for the top of the jam chuck coming within 1/4 inch of the center line on the sphere with a tight fit. In my case here, the jam chuck needs to be cut deeper to get the proper fit. Once you have the proper fit, taper the outside edge of the jam chuck. Fit the sphere into the jam chuck. You need to make sure the top of the jam chuck is the same distance from the center line all the way around. Slightly wrap the sphere on the edge to nudge it into place. I use a pencil pointed at the center line to see if the sphere is running true. When it looks good, a couple of taps with my hand in the center locks the sphere into place. Vibration can cause the sphere to work itself out of the jam chuck. A piece of masking tape prevents that from happening. The tape should not be used as a replacement for a good jam chuck fit. Rough turn the second half of the sphere, just as you did with the first half. When done, don't forget to mark the center of the end of the sphere. Next, we mark the actual final diameter of the sphere. Remove the tape and rotate the sphere 90 degrees in the jam chuck. Bring up the tailstock to hold the sphere in place. Note, to prevent damage to the sphere, you must use a live center that you can take the point out of, or use some type of a cup center. Center the sphere based upon the center points marked on both ends. When you get them aligned, draw a line between those center points. To help you center the piece, the original centering line can be used as an additional guide. It should center on the tailstock. Tighten the tailstock to hold the sphere in place, and then use a parting tool to cut a groove on the line you just drew. The groove must be cut all the way around the sphere. If it isn't, cut it deeper until it does. The diameter of the groove will be the diameter of the finished sphere, so if you want a sphere of a specific size, cut the groove accordingly. When the groove is complete, color in the groove with a pencil so you can see it. Take the sphere out of the jam chuck and rotate it back to the original orientation. Make sure it is running true based on the center line. Tap it to hold it in place, and again tape the joint between the jam chuck and the sphere with masking tape to make sure it doesn't vibrate out. Try not to cover up the center line with the tape since you have to cut up to that line. Sometimes this is unavoidable though when the spheres are smaller. What remains is to remove wood that is above the groove you cut. Depending on how close you came to rough turning a sphere, the groove may be quite deep. Any place where the groove is 1/8 of an inch or deeper, it is quicker to use a gouge to take off the excess. Bring up the tailstock to help hold the sphere in place and use your bowl or spindle gouge to remove some of the material. Take very thin cuts and don't remove material below the groove. The final shaping is done with a negative rake scraper. Negative rake scrapers are double bevel scrapers. For spheres, I use a 3/8 inch beating and parting tool. A straight skew also works. You sharpen the bevel that goes down on the tool rest, raising a burr on the top side. The burr does the cutting, but only lasts about 15 to 20 seconds, and then you need to resharpen. A couple of quick passes on the grinder does the job. Scrape the sphere until the colored in groove disappears. Stop often to make sure you don't go past the bottom of the groove. Each time you stop, resharpen the scraper. As you check the sphere, if you find an area where your groove has disappeared, you can mark that area with a circle so you don't go over it again. Continue the process over this end of the sphere. If you need to remove more material, you can first push the scraper straight in and follow that with light scraping cuts. When you get to the center line, make sure you don't remove it. Sand this end of the sphere. Don't skip any grits, and keep the sandpaper moving so you don't sand a flat into the piece. The negative rake scraper should have left a pretty clean surface. If it didn't, you probably did not sharpen it enough during the process. Remove the tape and repeat the process on the second half. It is common that the finished first half of the sphere doesn't fit tight in the jam chuck. No problem. Since the inside is tapered, just cut the jam chuck back a bit and the sphere should fit tight. You might have to make the jam chuck a little bit deeper as well. Luckily in my case here, I could use the jam chuck just the way it was without modifying it. Again, make sure the top of the jam chuck is the same distance from the center line all the way around, and the center line runs true. This is key to getting a true sphere shape. As with the first side, remove excess material with a gouge, and then use the negative rake scraper to finish the wood removal until the colored in groove disappears. As you get close to the center line, you will probably cut through the tape, so take your time so you don't pop the sphere out. When you get to the center, make a final cut past center, making sure you follow the contour of the first half of the sphere. Sand the second side, going through all the grits just as you did on the first side. Occasionally, when you are done with the second side, there is a slight bump at the center line. A little sanding will correct this. Just put the second end of the sphere into the jam chuck and sand just where the bump is to remove it. With that, the sphere is complete. Apply your choice of finish. I often use lacquer or a simple wax. So there's one more sphere to add to the collection. Thanks for watching. If you'd rather read a document detailing the steps, one can be found on my website, armadillowoodworks.com. In part 2 of this series, I will cover how to hold the sphere in a standard 4-jaw chuck so you can drill or hollow the sphere to create other projects. These techniques can also make it easier to make the basic sphere. Now, if you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe to my channel. Have fun and remember to use safe turning practices, including wearing your face shield. Thanks again.